When you first met Matt, what was your impression?
He meant well, but he didn't know quite what he was doing. I think we helped.
I think they did help. I've been running for most of my life, running through life to get somewhere else. But the thing about running is that you miss things, many things. And if I kept running, I was going to miss everything. 15 years ago, I was finishing seminary. I'd studied history, I'd studied Jesus. I was pretty sure I knew what I was doing. The truth is, I was centuries away and miles away from what Jesus did and what I was supposed to be doing. When I was running, it was easy to stay hidden, to avoid being known. One professor knew this, Eugene Peterson. He said, Matt, if you want to become a pastor, go find a parish. Go find a fishbowl where you can't escape being known and where you lose the fear of being known.
I think what I realized that nobody in America gets listened to very much. I was surprised at how little people had relationships. And all I had to do was just sit there and listen. I'd never read anything on church growth. I just started out going through the neighborhoods, knocking on doors, getting acquainted with people. That's what started what I said to you. I just started looking at this is my parish.
He knew that if I really wanted to walk like Jesus, I had to slow down. I was like, Eugene, I'm in. I'm sold. Where do I go to learn to become this kind of person, this pastor? He smiled and he said, you might have to go further than you think. You might have to leave America. And I thought, that'll never happen. As it happened, my wife and I were invited to study in St. Andrews in Scotland. That's when everything began to change. This is the story of learning to walk instead of run. It's the story of the places and the people who slowed me down. It's the story of the freedom I found and the freedom that found me. So we moved to St. Andrews, began to study, began to fill our heads with more good knowledge. I also began to need some pounds. We needed money, and there was a job for a parish assistant. So I applied, got the job, and showed up to work. My first day on the job, I came to this door, and I said, "Where's my office?" Reverend McDonald said, "Your office?" And I said, "Right, sorry, where's your office?" And he said, "My office?" Then he walked me around to the sign where he pointed to his home telephone number, which was hand-painted. There is no office. So where do I work? Then he pointed down the street and said, "Start walking. Get out into the parish." In Scotland, a parish is a piece of land. It's bordered by rivers, streams, mountain ridges, the ocean's edge. There are stone walls, farmers' fences. There are also roads, but roads that follow ancient walkways, paths people have walked for centuries, from one farm or one house to another. And each house has a name. American houses have numbers. In Scotland, houses have names. It took me a while to understand the difference. It took me a while to even notice. It took walking the parish. When he said start walking, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was always driving my car, going too fast to notice people or the weather or anything. To be in a parish meant to walk. And that was a whole different way of living. The first door I knocked on, I actually did my I was nervous, and that felt friendly. And I learned that I wasn't there to give people the good news. I was there to be a part of their life. With time, questions might come out, but I ended up learning more about them and they about me than me communicating the truth they needed to hear.
People are not used to being intimate in any verbal way. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. We don't want to be known by name many times because we don't know if they're going to like us. Who can you trust?
My generation, our century, is the tourist generation. We are always on the move, and so we can avoid being known. We avoid our deepest fears of being known. I realized that this avoidance, that this way of moving and always being on the go, is totally different than the way Jesus lived in the first century, and the way most humans have lived for all of history. So two things were happening at once. I had Eugene calling me to slow down, to become a pastor. I also began reading Tom Wright. And in his writings, I discovered a whole different vision of what life was like in the first century.
We live in such a rootless world. My wife and I have moved house, I think, 16 times in 42 years. It's a sort of complete mirror opposite of that, polar opposite of that. To think of being in that one place is the Benedictine ideal, stabilitas, stability. You are here, you stay here, and you go deeper.
I witnessed this idea of stability firsthand at a nearby abbey, where the monks welcomed me on retreat as part of their community.
Stability usually means staying in the same monastery all your life till you die. And that's quite a challenge in a world which chases around all over the place. You're trying to escape from who you are and where you are. And the secret of stability, or part of stability, is to realize that I'm a sinner, yeah, but before that, I'm a beloved sinner. And so I am loved by God as I am. Very quickly, you see people's faults, at least I do. Look at that guy, no. But to see people's virtues, no, it takes longer. To learn to know them takes time.
And it's not boring. It's only boring if you lack imagination. In fact, it's fascinating because human beings are endlessly fascinating. And you learn by going deeper rather than by the relentless quest for shallow novelty, which is how our culture lives.
The world I was discovering in the writings of Tom Wright exposed me to a whole different way of living, to the way that Jesus lived, especially to the way Jesus earned people's trust, how he risked being known. He lived in a fishbowl where everybody saw everything he did and heard everything he said.
When we read the New Testament, we must relentlessly avoid anachronism. We mustn't imagine that they think exactly like we do, to say, okay, let's go into a world where actually when you walk down the street, you know not only who everybody is, but who their uncles and cousins and aunts were, and who died last year and who got married the year before. That's the world that Jesus lived in. It's a very rich world, it's a very dangerous world. We'd be very vulnerable in that world, and we protect ourselves against that.
To continue my training, we had to move from St. Andrews to Pitlochry. Beautiful village, center of the Highlands. The church is perched on a hill. Malcolm Ramsey's the minister. I preached an awesome sermon one Sunday, but I asked Malcolm what he thought of it. Malcolm said the ending should have come 10 minutes sooner. I was like, Malcolm, that's only a 20-minute sermon. People deserve more on a Sunday. Malcolm said, Matt, people deserve more on a Monday. When you were writing that sermon, did you take time to visit people? Well, no, Malcolm, I was busy writing my sermon. That's when I knew I had to go back into the parish and learn some more names.
One part of speech that's the most important thing in the language is the name. Names are the very basic, life-giving term in language. You say a person's name, it means something, because there's a relationship then. Until there's a name, there's no relationship. And I had pastors who never knew my name. I was always greeted by my pastors with, how's your soul today? Never my name, just my soul. It always irritated me.
So I started spending less time in my office and more time walking in the parish, meeting people. I knocked on one door, expecting a granny to answer the door, who I could look down upon and talk about the weather with. The man who opened it had deep blue eyes, giant red hair, and I froze. And that's when I met Alan Torrance.
Well, I've done a few good treks, and very often we like to get naked, no in any kind of crude way or to upset people. You can imagine coming through the woods and then you see about 30 lasses and guys, starkers, like, whoa, what's happening here? How you doing? You still say hello.
And sensing my discomfort, he invited me in, made me a cup of tea. We got to talking about why I was there, which I still wasn't sure, but he put me at ease. He made me feel at home.
The way I was brought up was that you had to show hospitality to folk, you know. Give them a cup of tea, or a biscuit, a meal if they need a meal, you know, so we take great pride in that. You know, we're no rich folk, but to me, you're poor if you can't offer hospitality.
When I left Alan's house, a book fell off the shelf, which I didn't notice, but a minute later, Alan's at the door saying, Matt, look at this.
Check this. That book fell from the shelf, and the book was St. John's Gospel.
So I asked Alan, do you want to read it? He said, not really. But I said, how about if we get together a few other people who don't want to read it, and we ask questions?
We'd established he was going to set up a wee kind of group of men to look specifically at the Bible.
And while we were reading John's Gospel, I had a brilliant point on something theological. Alan said, give me a map. So we gave Alan the map at the back of the Bible, and I remember him realizing that the scale of the map was the same scale as where he lived, and how the distance from Capernaum to the Sea of Galilee was about the distance from Pitlochry to Dunkeld. He got the scale.
most of the main stories about what Jesus did are in that very small setting of Capernaum, Bethsaida, just the area around the north edge of the Sea of Galilee. And occasionally he gets into a boat, goes over to the other side. But we're still talking about what in our language are small villages, a few hundred inhabitants.
Here was a guy who had never studied the Bible like I had, but he could see it better than I did. He could understand it almost naturally. In his person, in his way of seeing, I was moving to the first century, to the way people thought and saw things.
The law at the time was if you speak and you're speaking, lies, then you will be punished by being stoned to death. If he was coming out with bold statements about, raising people for the dead, making the blind see, he had to have convinced communities that was true, or else communities would hold him to account and that he would, have no credibility whatsoever.
Part of Alan's skepticism was assuming Jesus preached in big cities, where he could project one image in public, but be somebody very different in private. You can't do that in a village. When Alan learned that Jesus lived in a village, earning people's trust the hard way, he believed. It wasn't a sermon that changed his mind. It was a map.
So that whole scale of things was crucial to my understanding and my convincing of, the power of Jesus Christ.
Basically, a lot of what happened was in an oral culture where they told stories, where they remembered what had happened. We can get a little glimmer of this from time to time. If a celebrity comes to town, if a famous footballer or rock star, what we have to imagine is a culture which was like that about everything all the time. They just told this stuff, and they knew things as a result in a deeply human way, which we have been in danger of forgetting now for quite some time.
My time in Pitlochry was coming to an end. It was time for me to get ordained, finally to get the collar. I had to find a parish. I thought I had done a good job of learning everything this journey had to teach, learning how to walk, visit. I had only just scratched the surface. There was a place called Methlick, which gave small a whole new meaning.
In Scotland, there's A roads and there's B roads. There are no C roads. But Methlick was at the end of the B999. That is the back of beyond.
As you enter the parish, the road actually takes these massive S-curves, and the sign says, "Slow down now." It's following old boundary lines of farms that were made for walking. So you have to slow down. Then as you drop down into the village, you pass the school on the right, and my kids walk every day. On the left, you pass Mars at Methlick, the tractor dealer. Then you hit the main road. This is Methlick. That's the main road. That's one direction to the church. My house this way is to Methlick Motors, and it's called Methlick Motors, but everyone calls it Duncan's because it's a third generation Duncan shop. Down the way is, well, the bus has stopped, which is kind of big news. He doesn't come very often. There's the pub, there's the grocery store, but everyone calls that French's because it's where Jimmy French opened. And then, well, that's it.
58 years.
58. All in this house?
Yes.
Where were you before this?
Udney.
Udney. Hi.
I belong to Udney.
And what do you like about life in a village?
It's not so fast. There's more time to think about things. That's right, I think.
Yeah.
Enjoy living in Methlick. I've been here all my days for the last 82 years, so I was born in Methlick. I was born up at Ward 4, actually. Right at the back. There's an old building there with it still had an iron roof on it, corrugated iron roof. That's where I was born.
Well, I've been here 44 years. We're the original tenants here.
Well, if I see somebody, I always say hello or good morning, whether I know them or not. So
We usually stop and speak to them, and most of the people, I took them to school. Quite a lot of people I took to school. We've been a bus driver here.
I knew I was going to be away for 2 years doing national service, so that kind of satisfied my outlook, you know, and you come back, and then my father died, so I was in charge of the business since when I was 22. You see, my grandfather bought this shop here from a man named Cobbett Smith, and the agreement was that he could stay in the house as long as he lived. This is back in the 1920s. Well, Cobbett Smith, he lived till he was 94. So
this year we won the Best Small Communities War Memorial in Scotland. Methlick is renowned throughout Aberdeenshire as being one of the closest villages that everybody does things together, and it's got a very good reputation on that.
This is the older church. The newer one's just over there. And I even can't say the older church because this is actually fairly modern. The church was founded in about 410, same time Rome fell. But we meet over there now because we've got a roof, which is an improvement upon no roof.